If deterrence fails, how does the U.S. and our allies defeat China in the Pacific? Well, it comes down to 6 words. Any sensor, any decider, any shooter. Remember that, it's going to be important later. I was invited to Camp Pendleton, California for an experiment called Project Convergence Capstone 4 to find out how the U.S. military, in combination with our allies, the UK, Canada, France, New Zealand, Australia, and Japan, are coming up with a plan to do just that. But before I get started, you know how I made that video about how to improve AI in Starfield? Well, as it turns out, I've been paying for 2 Xbox Live subscriptions, and I figured that out through RocketMoney. RocketMoney is a personal finance app that helps you cancel your subscriptions, lower your bills, and manage your money better. RocketMoney found 2 subscriptions I had forgotten about. I support someone's Patreon, and I was paying for Xbox Live twice. So canceling these 2 subscriptions saves me $924 a year. And RocketMoney allows me to cancel directly from the app with just a couple of taps. I don't even have to call anyone in customer service. RocketMoney has helped save its customers up to $740 a year with over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. So to save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using RocketMoney today. Go to rocketmoney.com/Macbeth to get started for free. You can even unlock more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/Macbeth to get started for free. Now let's talk about the plan to defeat China. For the longest time, the Navy was always going to Navy. The Army was always going to Army. And the Marines were always going to do Marine stuff. But it's not 1987 anymore. We don't have a 600-ship Navy that we had under Reagan. We don't have 18 active duty Army divisions full of Detroit diesels and Bethlehem steel ready to teach the commies some manners. We don't have the short supply lines and pre-positioned stocks that we had in Germany. We now face the tyranny of distance in the Pacific. If resupply trucks went to the wrong place in Europe, yeah, we could just turn them right around. It was a pain, but we would eventually get the beans and bullets where they needed to go. But in a contested ocean, we're going to have to be a lot more precise because we might not get a second chance at resupply. I mean, if the U.S. and our allies have to aid Taiwan, our supply lines will stretch at least 6,300 miles. But Taiwan is only 130 miles from China's coast, and their resupply can happen a lot faster. It almost sounds hopeless. Unless it isn't. We have the U.S. Army with its 132 watercraft. We have the U.S. Navy with 200 ships in the Pacific Fleet. We have the Marine Corps, who recognized China as a threat 10 years ago and is concentrating on fighting in the littorals. We have an Air Force that can project power from anywhere on the globe in hours. And we have a Space Force that has the technology to control the ultimate high ground and degrade our adversary's ability to conduct operations. We have our allies, Great Britain, Canada, France, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and even the Philippines. But how do we compete with China's magazines? And by magazine, I mean the depth, just the sheer quantity of missiles available to China. Well, we have to get weapons and sensors 6,300 miles from home, and some weapons, like the vertical launch tubes on the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, can't be reloaded out at sea, and it sounds like an unsolvable problem. Hey, remember back when I said, any sensor, any decider, any shooter? Remember that, it's going to be important later. It's later now. What if we could tie any sensor, whether it be a soldier with binoculars or a spy satellite, to any decider, meaning a person who can authorize a strike, to any shooter, meaning anyone with a weapon that could hit the target? I mean, we're never going to beat the People's Liberation Army arrow for arrow or missile for missile. And once you're shooting down missiles in mid-flight, you've just lost the initiative. But what if we could hit the arrows while they were still in the quiver? So hear me out. Any sensor, any decider, any shooter. That would mean a sensor, let's say an Australian Special Forces soldier, could spot a People's Liberation Army missile battery on an island. They could send a radio transmission to an American AWACS early warning plane where you have the decider. The decider could then look at all of the shooters, meaning all of the available weapon systems that exist across every single ally, and then decide which shooter has the best chance of hitting the target and surviving a counterstrike. Now we're talking. Now, the Navy isn't just worried about how to use Navy assets to destroy a potential target. It has every possible weapon system in theater that could affect that target. And that's exactly what the US military and 6 other nations did at Project Convergence Capstone 4 back in February. The Army created a system that tied in sensors, deciders, and shooters from thousands of nodes. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the term Killchain. It's the military concept of identify, dispatch, attack, destroy. And that was fine during COIN or counterinsurgency operations where you had a relatively slow pace of battle. You might spend days or weeks trying to find the pattern of life on Daddy El Baddie just to put one hellfire through his car window. And we could take the time to do that during COIN operations, but now we're in the world of LSCO, or large-scale combat operations, and things are going to move a lot faster. The traditional kill chain just isn't going to work anymore. The answer is to take thousands of sensors, whether they be a drone, radar, or a special forces operator with binoculars, and turn them into a kill web. Any sensor, any decider, any shooter. All right, so back during D-Day, we painted white stripes on the planes of Allied aircraft to indicate who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. And that is a relatively slow way of identifying friend or foe. Visual information goes at human speed. But with a kill web of sensors, we know where the good guys are at all times. Once we see the bad guys, we can feed that information into a data pipe and send the good guys after that target at machine speed. All right, so shooting is great, but what about logistics? Eventually you have to reload. I mean, with the war in Ukraine, we've certainly seen how hard it is to resupply units when the enemy drones can spot visual and thermal signatures of basically anything that moves. Well, the answer to that is the multi-domain Corter Pulst operations. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but let me explain. The Navy is experimenting with surface and airborne drones. Some of these drones might be launched from a manned ship, others from an unmanned mothership. You might even be able to 3D print a replacement part on a manned ship, put it in an airborne drone, put the airborne drone on an unmanned surface vessel drone, and send that team of drones to deliver the repair part where it's needed. The unmanned ship gets it close to the warfighter, the aerial drone takes it the last mile. Now, ideally, we would be able to lift shipping containers full of food and ammunition, but we're not quite there yet. Trust me, we are working on it. But you got to crawl before you can walk, and walk before you can run. So what about this pulsed corridor? Well, it can be assumed that the fight will be spread over multiple islands in the Pacific, so some units may be surrounded by adversaries. It might be tough to resupply under those conditions, unless you take a page out of a zombie game. Okay. So, you know when you play a zombie game, you might have to get through a horde of zombies to get to the safe room, and once you've defeated those zombies, you only have a limited amount of time before more zombies show up? Well, that's kind of the idea behind multi-domain Corter pulsed operations. You use fires, meaning weapon systems and missiles, that are tied to your sensors to blast open a corridor through the adversary. Then you send those manned or unmanned resupply vessels through that corridor, conduct the resupply, and back out again before the enemy reacts and that corridor closes. Ideally, any wounded come back on vessels that delivered supplies, and believe it or not, the Marine Corps actually has an idea of using things like narco submarines to help discreetly evacuate casualties. The Marine Corps is always innovating. You know, I became an infantryman back in 1994. Back then, we still had equipment and weapons from Vietnam. GPS guidance systems like the Plugger were issued at platoon level. Artillery was still calculated using charts and darts. Today, we have the ability to use any sensor, any decider, and any shooter to put effects on a target we can't even see. The Army used to Army, the Navy used to Navy. A finger can't do much damage on its own, but if we take all of our fingers and the fingers of our allies working together, those fingers will form a fist that can protect our freedom and our way of life. The Project Convergence Capstone 4 event was just the latest experiment in closing that fist, and there will be many more to come. One more thing, I wish to thank the Army Futures Command for inviting the first YouTuber ever to that experiment. I appreciate you guys taking a chance on me. Thank you for giving me the honor of communicating your story. I'd also like to thank the soldiers of the 24th Theater Public Affairs Support Element out of Fort Bliss. Without you guys, none of this would have been possible. You know, traveling out to California on my own dime wasn't cheap, and the Patriot and HIMARS system will be a major weapon in the Pacific if war ever comes. So if you want to support my channel, go grab one of my Live, Laugh, Launch t-shirts for HIMARS or Patriot bunker branding. Thank you guys so much for watching.
It's me, Captain Bannon of the documentary Team Yankee. When I'm not kicking commie butts, I'm wearing t-shirts from Ryan McBeth, available at Bunker Branding. Knife hands, HIMARS, landmines, Patriot, and even my favorite, the TOW missile. Mushna, we want t-shirt too. Take a hike, commie. So come on down to Bunker Branding and take a stand for what's really important about America. Capitalism.